Hey, hi there. Let's have a look at the contribution of the various sectors to an economy. Now, if we go back to the 1960s, let's have a look firstly at agriculture, okay? If we go back to the 1960s, we can see agriculture is a substantial contributing factor even to the more sophisticated economies. We have Brazil, Peru, China, India, Indonesia, Turkey. You can see that the US and these places are fairly small. We move forward in time, okay, and we can start seeing a development of a correlation here, a relationship, okay? As you go along, the higher your GDP, the smaller agriculture's percentage of GDP becomes. You can see that this is almost developing into a straight line. As time goes by, the countries that are heavily reliant on agriculture as a large chunk of their GDP just basically remain poor. Okay, when you got and remember, this is also agriculture absorbs a lot of people. In South Africa, agriculture represents 3% of GDP, roughly. I think that's just South Africa over here. Yep. And that employs something like 30% of the workforce. Okay, so you have a whole lot of people working at basically subsistence level. This is what's happening here. Because in South Africa and in the United States and places like that, agriculture is to a large degree in the US, especially the US, you've got it contributes 1.9% to GDP, and only about 3% of people work in it. It's similar in Japan and places like that. So what happens is that they very heavily industrialized. Okay, they're using machines and equipment, etc., etc., etc. South Africa, we still have a high percentage of sort of labor-intensive farming methods, and when you get to these kind of places, well, they have hardly any capital equipment whatsoever. So what you're dealing with here is subsistence peasant agriculture. And if you then compare these countries to and that's one of the reasons why these countries are so poor, because at the end of the day, agricultural production has become a lot more sophisticated, which means that the cost of food has come down dramatically. Okay, so the consequence of that is that you end up with a fairly low contribution to your GDP, but absorbing a lot of people. And then, if 70% of your GDP is dependent on agriculture, you basically in a whole lot of trouble. And you can see, I mean, this is now the US has gone down to 1.2% of GDP. But remember, GDP in the US is also affected by a whole lot of other factors. But you can see all the European countries are here clustered together. South Korea is an exception. China still has a lot of people involved in agriculture, and it's a significant chunk. It's 1%, it's 11% of their GDP. But it has to be because you have a very, very large population. The same with India. 17% of GDP is coming from agriculture, but they have massive populations, these countries, so they actually need a large amount of food. And basically, what happens? A lot of people are involved in producing it. China and India also not yet highly sort of technological food production. They still pretty much they still use sort of large amount of peasant farmers out there, not using the newest techniques. But when you're looking at like European and the United States and places like that, it's you're working with very high levels of productivity. I'll demonstrate. Okay, so let's carry on. This is sort of what you get in Europe. This video is actually from Holland. So you can see, I mean, this is highly technological. There you have one combine harvester, and then you'll see in a second the next one will kick in as they start moving forward. There we go, and it's all becoming very much the pace at which the harvesting is happening is phenomenal. I mean, if you look at these machines, they're going at a rapid walking speed, possibly. And the width, if you consider the size of these machines, they've got I think they've got 3 or 4 machines width that are busy harvesting at the same time. You can see pouring 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you had individual peasants with a hoe walking along or a scythe walking along cutting this, and there is another peasant following and shaking it out by hand to get the kernels, etc., etc. You can just imagine how much slower it would be to perform what these machines are doing in minutes. So that's another reason why, even though a small percentage of their GDP comes from this, the quantities that they produce. I mean, the United States is basically it exports so much grain, it feeds grain to basically the whole world. Between aid and between what it sells, the United States contributes a significant amount to the world production of grain stocks. Okay, and that's basically what I have to say on that matter. Have a good day. Adios.